Donald Cohen is the founder and executive director of the Research and Policy Center in Public Interest, co-author with Alan McCallion of The Privatization of Everything, and also of It's Never Our Fault. He lives in Los Angeles. I heard Donald when he spoke at the National PNHP meeting in November, and was very impressed with his depth of knowledge and perspective on how not only healthcare is being privatized, but every other service which should be public is being privatized. So Donald, you're on.
Okay, so I put the link to our website, so you can click it and save it at some point. You can look at, because we do cover lots of different things. I'm not going to talk a lot about healthcare because I assume that's what the discussion will be. So I'm going to give sort of a broad view. The book I wrote is this book right here. If you can see it on, I'm holding it up. Feel free to buy it. It's coming out in paperback next month. It is on audiobook already, and I can share the links for that stuff if people listen to books. I don't. So, and the idea of the book is, it's called The Privatization of Everything, because it really is, there's private involvement in virtually all of the things that, bind us together and that we all count on as citizens and participants. So it really covers a lot of stuff, but it adds it up. At least the intent is to add it up into some larger themes, and I'll get to those. So I'm going to start with a few stories because that's always more engaging. So and different kinds, and then I'll do that, and then I'm gonna get to the larger ideas, but I'm gonna tell the stories first. Sometimes I do it the opposite way, and people learn differently. So Chicago, and some of you, if you heard me, I've told this following story probably 1,000 times. In Chicago in 2008, if you remember, was the Great Recession. Last time the banks were failing. And cities were bleeding red ink, and Chicago was as well. So on a Friday, there was a proposal made to the mayor, it was Mayor Daley at the time, announced a proposal from a private consortium of a Wall Street firm, Morgan Stanley, a Middle Eastern, what's called a sovereign wealth fund, which is basically a national investment fund, and then a national parking company. And they would give the city $1.1 billion upfront in exchange that they, to meet a desperate need. I mean, they were in desperate straits, in exchange for control of the city's 36,000 parking meters for 75 years. Yeah, I always get those looks when I say that. I was looking at Doug's face. So, and just to put in context, that's 2083. Okay. I venture to guess almost none of us will be driving in 2083. I think it's a fair bet. I know I won't. So here's a terrible deal. Everybody said it was an absolutely terrible deal. Financially, it was a ridiculously bad deal. Even if there was no other way to, it was the best solution of a million horrible solutions for their fiscal crisis. They got taken. They sold $1 billion too cheap. But it was stupid to do, even though you wouldn't do that. But the worst part, this is far worse than the financial, and prices went up on the, it's sort of obvious, the total, the parking meter prices went up. But the city had, the worst part of the feature of the deal is that the city has to, if they want to eliminate parking spots for, pedestrian mall, because they want to change how a neighborhood functions, or a street fair temporarily, or to eliminate spots for like bus rapid transit, dedicated bus lanes or bike lanes. If they want to do any of those things, basic responsibilities of a city, they have to buy them back. Okay. So, right. So you think about it, you're gonna, and I worked with a professor at Roosevelt University who had interviewed a bunch of transit planners in the city who were unable to implement a plan for 20 bus rapid transit routes because they didn't have the money, they didn't have cash. So that's the first example. And it's, it's horrible and everyone knows about it. People won't do a deal that bad, but the features of that deal are common. And we can get into the, everything's got a lot of detail. So the next example I'm going to talk about is the weather. It's actually raining. I don't know, you guys part of this weather thing that's going on? You're in Oregon. I mean, actually, you're everywhere. Okay, raining in. I live in Los Angeles. It doesn't rain that often. So the weather, all of the you may know this. All of the data for our weather apps on our phone and on TV is public data. It's the National Weather Service data, and they collect it, but then they give it out for free. We pay for it. Taxpayers pay for it. Then there are companies that will take it and package it and do add-on products. Some are just whiz-bang graphics that are dumb. John Oliver did a piece on this a while back, but some are legitimate. The businesses need extra warning signs or whatever. So it's legitimate stuff. AccuWeather's one of the biggest companies. If you were paying close attention, the previous president nominated the CEO to be the head of the Weather Service. It was unsuccessful. He failed, thankfully. But they're one of the largest, and they have business clients, one of which was Union Pacific Rail, cargo rail. So in 2015, there was a tornado in Oklahoma, and the AccuWeather, Union Pacific's trains were, could be impacted. So I want to just read the quote of the CEO after the fact on a TV interview touting the value of his services. He says, 2 trains stopped 2 miles apart. They watched the tornado go between them. That's a good thing, right? Absolutely. Okay, back to him. Unfortunately, it went into a town that didn't have our service, and a couple of dozen people were killed. But the railroad did not lose anything. That's the privatization of public safety. So moving on. Another example is in public education. Now, there's I don't know if, again, you might be paying attention. There is a wholesale assault and a wholesale privatization of effort to privatize public education happening in this country through school vouchers in every red state and charters, the growth of charter schools in every state, period. So I'm going to talk more about charter because many people don't see charters as privatization. The growth of charters is what I focus on, which is absolutely privatization. So I'm going to give it the example I'm going to give is focus on charters. If you know anything about charter schools, and maybe you have kids or grandkids, in charters, which is fine. They were originally intended to be laboratories of innovation. Teachers get together and the school gets together and come up with new ideas on how to teach kids, but then share them. So everyone, in the system can benefit across the country. Albert Shanker, head of the American Federation of Teachers, one of the proponents of this early idea. But unfortunately, it's not that anymore. It's now a market thing. So in the school choice marketplace, and here it works, a parent can go to a charter, can choose between public school or a charter school. And if they choose the charter, the money follows the kid. And they're privately operated, publicly funded, completely publicly funded. So, but in the marketplace, a number of charters have come up with schemes to manipulate the market, or put it that way. So for example, this is illegal what I'm about to say, but the lots do it. And as they figure out ways to screen out or push out that kids that will be harder to educate or more expensive to educate or behavior problems, or, in the end, that might bring their test scores down. Because in the marketplace, one of the things families look at is test scores to choose a school. So that so that's sort of a distortion, it's competition and a distorted outcome of competition. One school in New York had the New York Times found this, had a got to go list. A principal had a got to go list they found of kids that he wanted to get rid of because it was just too hard to educate. And then go back to the public schools, public district schools. The other thing that in the charter world is competition also leads to secrecy. The McDonald's secret sauce. That's the point. That's an essential part of market competition is don't tell your competitors how you do things. Charter school handbooks we found, we didn't do a comprehensive review. There's 7,800 schools around the country, but some of them at least have non-disclosure agreements in them, employee handbooks, that the teacher would be sued, and it has happened, if they share the school's trade secrets. And what are the trade secrets? curriculums, lesson plans. I mean, the stuff both that we were originally intended, the charter schools were originally intended to share, and also we pay for it. It's also ours, we also buy it, by the way. So those are a few examples. I could go over, the book is called The Privatization of Everything. It's 300 pages. There's lots of examples of different stuff. So I'm going to step back a little bit. I think I started at 10 after, so I try to pay attention. Is that right? Okay. I'm trying to look at the clock as well, so I don't talk too much. And remember, interrupt me if you need to or want to, or just feel like it. So I want to, the book I said ties that together, and I want to give you my definition of privatization. I just define it this way. It's a little wonky, but it's the private control over public goods. That's my definition. Now, let me say what I mean by public goods, because I don't know, there's probably no economists on the call. There's an economics textbook definition I'll mention, but here's my definition of public goods. There are three things: the things that we all need to survive and thrive and get through life. Second, they're things that we need everyone to have, right? We need everyone to be healthy. We need every kid to be educated, even if we don't have kids. We need everyone to have those things. It's in all of our interest. And then finally, if we decide we want everyone to have them, that we can only accomplish that if we do it together through government action. Now, it could be private involvement, but it's the only way to get universal public goods is through the government, through public action. So, and I believe is in a democracy that we should be able to decide what fits those three categories, those three criteria: schools, knowledge, public health, mobility, the ability to move around, clean air, clean water. I mean, the ability now, I think we'd all agree, the ability to get access to the internet is you need it to survive at this point. You need it to, whether it's commerce or health or education or whatever. Sorry, spam. I'll turn it off. So let me, the economics textbooks define public goods a little differently. I'm going to just let me say what they are. There are two things. They say that the only things that are truly public goods are things that can't be prevented from being used, and both criteria, and that one person's use doesn't stop another person from using them too. I'll give you an example because I'll tell you why this matters. Like a street light. You can't stop someone from using a street light. You can put a fence around it, but I mean, that's, on a street corner. And second is, if one person is using the street light, another person can use it too. I mean, there's limits of how many people could fit, but you can't, it's not exclusionary, right? Another person can come up and use the street light too. So that's the technical. So, but that definition for lots of economists, lots of folks, that are in sort of deciding, economists that are, influencing which direction the country goes, believe in that definition of public goods. And that definition gives the market control, not public, over what is our life's essentials. So take healthcare, which you all know a lot about. It fits the definition of a private good. You can exclude people from getting it. Check, we know we do that. And there are only so many hospital beds, there's limits, right? You got to have both criteria. So if we say that it's a private, because it fits the criteria in the economic terms of a private good, then what we're saying is that it's a good in the market and you only get it if you can afford to have it, fundamentally. It's obviously more complicated than that. So let me move to another topic. So one of the many things preventing us from being able to establish universal public goods, right? Many things. We know all about the power of insurance companies and pharma and real estate and big oil. So there's, certainly power and influence, but there's also a set of kind of ideas that have almost become common sense in America. And I want to mention some of those and then say what my ideas are. Idea number one: market competition, and this is not universal, but this is embedded deeply within American culture. Market competition and the profit motive are the most effective way to meet people's needs. They're actually, some people even say they're a better expression of democracy. We vote with our wallets. So that's the market. Next, businesses are inherently more efficient than government. That is, I deal with that every day on my job. Oh, but the businesses can do it better. They're more efficient. And government, of course, is wasteful. Second, and another one is, so we should therefore run government like a business. These are just some of the ideas that we run up against all the time. We should just run government like a business. It's not. And finally, or not finally, but another one is we just don't have the money to do the things we need, so we need the private sector to take care of it. We hear that all the time in infrastructure, the building of roads and bridges and water systems and all that. We just don't have the money, let Wall Street take care of it. So these are some of the core arguments that, you know, that we deal with all the time in our work. So now and I think none of those things are true. So I'm going to go through and kind of summarize what I think sort of some of my core ideas about privatization. And then you'll see how this hopefully wraps together. So number one, I see, and this took a while for me to see this, I've been doing this for a long time, that at its core, privatization is an assault on democracy. So go back to Chicago parking meters. The city council and the mayor, hands are tied if they want to do some of their basic jobs, you know, the things that they're basically responsible for. Land use, housing, transportation, the environment. They have to make the private the folks that control the parking meters whole, which means in a lot of cases, they just don't do it. It's a straitjacket. And that's common in contracts, right? Because privatization is always embodied in some sort of contract or agreement, and those things tie our hands. So that's number one. Number two, oftentimes we hear that the role of government is to step in when markets fail. You may have heard that. I completely disagree. I think there are market things and there are public things. And markets are simply the wrong tool to provide public things. Now I'm saying market, I'm not saying the private sector, because the private sector can be involved as long as we're in control. I mean, we don't build the roads, but there are roads and we're in control. So the weather example I gave is a good example. We need everyone to be safe, right? If you put it in the market and make it a market good, then those, private good for sale, safety from tornadoes, then those with the resources in the markets can have them, and those that don't cannot, right? That's what the market does. Markets exclude, markets segregate, and public things, in my definition, need to include all. Once it's everyone needs to get educated, everyone needs to have healthcare. Okay. All of a sudden I got very big on the screen. So it's just, so one of the things I say is it's nothing wrong with markets, but it's just the wrong tool. It's like cooking an egg with a hammer, just the wrong tool. That's the second idea, that markets are the wrong tool. The third idea is that there's a difference between public and private. It's important to understand. Let me just click something. Okay. I like just being able to see you, but I'll just pick two people I want to look at the top of the screen. So I want to start. There's a difference between difference between public and private. Let me start by clarifying one thing. It's private companies, legitimate institutions. We all, they're all around us, and some of us may run companies. Private companies do one thing: they sell stuff. They sell food, they sell smartphones, gasoline. Banks sell money. That's what a loan is. They're selling you money, right? That's what private do. The public wants to ensure that people have the things they need. So that's the difference there. So what are private companies that sell things? They may care about what they sell. This is not a value judgment. This is just a fact. Business owners aren't, I know lots of business owners in my community who really care a lot about what they, their product. But what do they pay? Big companies pay attention to how many they sell, how much it costs, what price they get for it, how much it costs to make, what their profit margin is between those two things, and their market share. Those are the things they measure, right? And so, and again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just different. Those are their measure. But it's important to understand that's what they do. They sell stuff. And the more they sell, the better they do. So actually, prison companies there are a lot of private prisons around the country. Private people sell heads and beds. They make more money the more heads and beds. Fact. Water companies want to sell more water. If you look at, in that example, if you look at the water, some of the national and global water companies reports to the SEC, they see conservation efforts. They include conservation efforts as a risk to their business. And it's an objective risk. People will buy less water, and it could affect their bottom line. For-profit colleges, they sell butts in seats. They want to sell as much as possible. So it's all very, that's just what they do. I don't pass judgment on it, but I think it's super important that we understand that we just have different interests. Sometimes those interests may align. Sometimes they may not. In a lot of cases, they don't. In the cases that I write about. And then the last one. I'm going to do this, and then because I know there'll be questions about what do we do, so I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to talk about that because I'll make it under my 20 minutes if I do it this way. So the last idea is that too often we hear about private sector efficiency, and that they can do it better because they're more efficient. I said, but I think that's kind of a smokescreen, and I think it's just plain wrong in many ways. I'm going to say what I mean. There are lots of efficient businesses. There are efficient governments. There's inefficient, all of the above. So, but I hear it all the time. Businesses will do it cheaper and will save money and will do it better because they're more efficient. But the important thing to understand is that what does efficiency actually mean? I have a little formula for it. It's doing things, it's money or effort in for more or the same or more out. That's just efficiency. If we find a better place, a better route to take to school or to the store or to the movies or whatever, we're being more efficient. Okay, all good. So let me set that aside. So businesses, and when they're providing public services, and I'm going to use Medicaid in Iowa as the example, they have, first off, we have to start with the fact that they have business expenses, typical. For big corporations, high executive compensation packages, sometimes in the millions. They have returns to investors. They have political expenses, lobbying. They'll have debt because there's mergers and acquisitions that, and they're borrowing money all the time. And these are all normal business expenses. Again, I'm not passing judgment on it, but they're all, but none of it is money that's spent on the service. That's important. So they say they're going to be more. So in Iowa, they privatized Medicaid. I can't remember now. It's before the pandemic, but not that long before the pandemic. So they privatized. They said, of course, it would be cheaper and it would be better, right? And the logic being because they're more efficient. Okay, so we ask a simple question. All right, you're going to be more efficient means you're going to spend less money on something because you got less money going out, right? You're not going to spend on the service. What are you going to spend less money on? So let me just give a couple of examples of the money going out. Anthem, this was a little bit old date, a few years old. Anthem, which is the parent group of one of the companies that got part of the state, the top 5 executives in between 2018 and 2020 had made $108 million. United Health, they got another part, the top 7 executives in 2020 made $219 million in that period of time. All that money going out the door. Maybe they work hard, they deserve it, but it's money going out the door. So when we ask the question, what are you going to spend less on? There's not that many choices. And the bottom line is you give out less healthcare, right? And which is exactly what happened. There were more denials, the appeals were harder to get, probably, the staffing ratios were probably lower. I don't remember all of the details because it was a while ago, but it's really important to understand their interests are different. And when they say efficiency, that means they're doing something less. And so when we get to a discussion about healthcare, whether it's Medicare Advantage or this new DCE stuff or all that, they're taking all this money out. They're going to spend less money on something, and you all know better than I do. So let me stop right there. I went 1 minute over my 20 minutes. Can you take me off the thing so I can see people, the spotlight?
Mike, I'm not sure how that happened. I couldn't see the gallery either, so I was scooting through to see people. But can you take us off of a speaker view and let everybody?
Wait. Oh, I did it. I could do it. No, I did it. Maybe it was me. Okay.
No,
Oh,
I did it.
Okay, so let me just stop there for questions and comments and all that. So,
I see Ken had a thumb up, I guess, not a hand up.
There we go. I want to say, I think this topic is enormously important, and that the single payer movement has not realized it until recently. We're fighting 40 plus years of enormous right-wing propaganda to privatize everything. I have a 28-year-old son, and he cannot comprehend the idea that the public sector can do anything better than the private sector. If we're ever going to get single payer, we need to counter that 40 plus years of propaganda.
I'm gonna make a note. I want to come back to that, but I won't respond to each one. That's
Yeah.
find a pen. Okay. Okay. Well, what do you all think? Do you think the government can do anything? Well,
Well, I come back to the post office that, I live in Vermont, and a lot of UPS and FedEx stuff comes to my door from USPS because they don't want to come to, and I live on Main Street of a county shire. I don't even live out in the sticks, but it's not worth it to them. I mean, we sometimes get it from a UPS truck or a FedEx truck, but we often, especially on the weekend, the USPS is now serving on Sundays, and we get our stuff from the USPS a lot of the time. Mike, you have your hand up, and then Barbara Harrison.
Yeah, one example, Donald, you may know about is Connecticut had privatized its Medicaid. And then I think, Betty, you can help me, how long ago they got tired of it and reverted back to public management, and their costs went down 14% or something like that, and they've been able to keep that in the under the government control since then. So that's one example. The other thing I wanted to get for sure is the wording you used for how economy textbooks categorize public versus
well,
private.
I didn't actually use the words. It's non-exclusive and non-rivalrous is if you Google it. Yeah, those are the actual economics terms, but that was confused me. I do want to track down that Connecticut story. I wasn't aware of that. That's helpful.
Yeah, I can't remember the years. I think it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Maybe it was even longer ago that they decided to go back to having the state manage it instead and saved all that money.
Great.
I would just say the people of this country are the government if they would only participate. And that means that movements in this country, because the media is not, the commercial media is not going to do it because it is owned by 6 mega corporations, which include weapons manufacturers and fossil fuel companies. And it is imperative that movements go out and speak with people who are different from themselves and listen and bring them information where they are at. And yes, it's going to be difficult because the corporations own the politicians. And this is why we had the Silicon Valley Bank collapse, why we have no regulation for the media. And of course, the internet is unregulated. And half the pie goes to the military in this country. The rest is little triangles with curved bottoms that go to everything else, up to the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Lynn, and then Paul.
Yes, well, a wonderful example is Medicare and Medicare Advantage. I know an insurance agent that said that many Medicare Advantage clients call them to switch back to Medicare, traditional Medicare. And the New York Times had this article a couple of months ago about the fraud that the Medicare Advantage plans and the denying seniors of tests. And they are looking at that now, but I would say that was a big difference between government and private.
Yeah, Yeah, and more Medicare Advantage. I mean, in Medicare Advantage, when they add insurance companies in the mix, they have to pull off their profits, and so there's only so much money out there. Things, and so if you take out some, you got to do less of something.
Thank you, Paul.
Well, I just want to enforce, and of course, it's obvious, I think, that everybody here, government, it's messy. I understand that, but we have a lot of terrific people in government, and look at what happens to them. Look at Dr. Fauci. He's been attacked repeatedly by conservatives and conservative voices. We have these right-wing think tanks that always frame it as the private versus the public, and the private does it so much better. So we have a propaganda problem in that people are brainwashed into always seeing the good in the private industry and always seeing the quote bad in government. I also have experience as a union person and hearing anti-union talk from coworkers who love to, criticize the union, but they never leave the union company to go to a non-union company because, of course, they get better wages and better benefits. But one of my relatives works at DuPont, and he was very much anti-union, finally went into management. He's retired now and has the beautiful retirement. But in all those years, when I heard anti-union talk, not a peep about all the people that were poisoned, their families, their neighborhoods and communities with PFAS and PFOS. All of that was hush hush. So that speaks to how they enjoy not being criticized when they deserve to be criticized. How come that isn't amplified more? That's all I want to say.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that, a whole discussion about that, but keep going for now. Yeah.
Well, do you want to say a little bit about that right now while it's fresh?
No, I have good notes. It's a big one.
Okay. Okay.
It's
So,
good.
Bill and then Ken.
And by the name of Stephen Bezruchka, who is a PhD, MPH in Seattle, has just published a book called Inequality Kills Us All. I put it in the chat. I'm sorry for my bloody typos. It's another important book. I know that reading right now seems to be a waste of time, but I think it's terribly important to get at the most incisive and clear and powerful understandings of what we're facing. The second book is a book called Health Communism, produced by Verso Publications in London. It's brilliant, brilliant. It's not easy to read, but it's profound, and it shows that universal health care is inimical with capitalism. And that's what we're up against. And that's why the oligarchy is so ferociously opposed to universal health care, because they understand that this will fundamentally change the economic system in America, and it's going to require a massive push. There was a major article in the New York Times this last Sunday, that essentially addresses that question. There it is, Don. Beautiful, beautiful. I'd like you to say, if you started reading it, what you think about it. Anyway, it's very clear that we are at the cutting edge of the transformation of America, either extremely to the right or extremely to the left, but there is no middle ground.
Thank you, Bill. Ken and then Chuck.
So I have a
Actually,
couple
so
of
Ken will
points.
go, and then when Chuck speaks, I want him to, he didn't actually have a chance to speak to us before we started, so he'll
That's
have
fine.
a few extra comments too.
Okay.
Ken?
Okay, a couple of quick points. One is there's a structural piece of American society that is not obvious until you really think about it, which is the Freedom of Information Act shows us that information about administration of programs by government is by law transparent, and information by administration of private companies is by default and law private. And that means that newspapers, when they look for exposés, are doing most of their exposés about government administration. And I don't know how to change that. And I don't think the newspapers are all that unhappy with it, but it's sort of the water we swim in. Another thing I want to mention is I did my medical training in New York City at a public hospital. I think several of the people on this call did the same. It's an interesting example of a setting where people fought back. Ed Koch and several other mayors worked very hard to try to divest and privatize public hospitals, which provide most of the healthcare, especially at that time, provided most of the healthcare for most of the poor and working people in New York, and was not able to do it because he was opposed by people in many places. So they closed down about a half a dozen hospitals, turned them into clinics or disappeared them, but the bulk of them they were never able to close down. And that's because people understood that this is something that was important to them. Not nearly as interesting as the book that Bill mentioned, I would mention a book called Palaces for the People by Eric Kleinenberg, who talks about the importance of public spaces and for building community. Check.
Thank you. Thank you. So Chuck, can you go ahead and speak?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. My apologies for being here late. I'm coming off of an eye exam and I just collapsed. But this is such a vitally important topic. Thank you, Donald, for the work that you're doing. I'd love to communicate with you a little bit offline here. For many years, I taught a class in several universities that centered on my thesis of the political industrial complex, which is really the collective of all these entities, these institutions that have become hyper privatized. And the next step that I take in my own thinking is to pivot and see it as one of the three cornerstones of rising fascism in this country. And I'd like you to address that if you wouldn't mind. The other two cornerstones are white nationalism and religious nationalism. The first here being state corporatism, right? State corporatism is, I think, is in essence what you are talking about. And then the role of the billionaire class. And I think we need to call it what it is, the billionaire class. There are roughly 3,000 in the world who control more than half the wealth of the world. And they're the ones who are manipulating from the very top, and they have enablers, the management class, right? The technocrats in the middle who do their bidding. And I was at a university where I was a union organizer, and I got fired for union organizing, though it's legally protected speech. Nonetheless, I hope you can address some of those questions, some of those core questions, because in order for us to succeed on healthcare justice, we have to link ourselves with everybody else who's facing injustice or privatization, as it were. That's the only way we're going to build the capacity to win here, as well as on housing, as well as on climate, and so forth. Yeah, I'll stop there, Betty. I don't want to go any further. I think that's plenty for Donald to chew on, but I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much.
I love groups like this. They throw like this, like the biggest possible challenges and questions that we all face. It's like, come up with a soundbite. I'm joking.
I don't see any other virtual hands. Can anybody wave really obviously to me if you had a question that you still wanted or a comment you wanted to make?
Richard had his hand up, but then it came down. So maybe because you had put a quote, Richard Behan, but then you put a comment in. So maybe you decided against.
Well, yeah, quickly here. I don't want to stop the questions that you are going to answer. I wanted to recommend another book about the propagandizing of the market versus government, and that's Tom Hartman's book, The Hidden History of Neoliberalism. I put it in the chat as well, so
thank you.
And not waste any more time here.
Yeah, I can't remember if I have it because it's one of those, but he's really smart, so that's a good one. I just found on my bookshelf 2 copies of Palaces for the People, so if anybody needs one, I don't know why I have 2 copies of it, but it's important. So let me just talk a little. I'm not going to directly answer your question, Chuck. Out of the gate, let me say a few things in response. So I want to start with the 40-year attack that somebody, when people move around on the screen, I forget who says what, right? You know what I mean? So the 40-year attack on government, it's real serious. There has been concentrated, concerted, not top down, but fundamentally coordinated effort to turn people away from, to turn people away from government. And there's two components to that. They attack government. They attack the institution. Attack the institution includes things like, weakening laws, preventing new laws from happening, or weakening financial regulations, like we just saw happen, that affected what just happened last week in the Silicon Valley. Regulatory capture, under austerity, cutting taxes so you can't deliver, the services that we need. You cut the IRS, you can't do audits. You can't do audits of billionaires. You can't, you can't collect the money that we need to run, to run the place. So that, so that's the institution, but they also attack the idea of government, right? Which is, in a sense that, neoliberalism that, Richard just mentioned, the book, it's about we're all individuals, that that the organizing principle should really be us as participants in the market, right? So privatize everything, deregulate what you can, as much as you can, and cut taxes as much as you can. It's a little bit of a simplification, but that's the fundamental pillars of neoliberalism. So that attack, and then there's been this, constant drumbeat, the DMV, right? Everybody knows how bad the DMV is. I actually don't think it is. My wife just actually went to the DMV today to update her in the middle of the day, and she came back within like a half hour. I don't know. She must have done something, must have been working out. So, you can schedule online. I mean, but that stuff sticks in our head. Not just that it sticks in our head, that there's truth in it. There's, a big bureaucracy is inherently got humans in it, which is, that's the start of the problem. Even if we were the government, this 30 people, we were the government and we ran everything, we'd mess it up. It's complicated, right? And so there's plenty of frustrations and stories and things that don't go well, but the right has weaponized all that, weaponizes every example. And they never lift up the positive examples. So if you have a drumbeat, a propaganda machine, as someone mentioned, saying government's bad, government's bad, government's bad, and we all can think of an example, even if it's just the pothole, God, I had to get a new axle in my car because of the pothole. My kids live on a street in Oakland. My stepdaughter and her husband. It's horrible. That's call. I keep saying call the city council, fix the street. That's government to people. So, but the point I want to make about that is that those of us on the other side of the spectrum have helped the right wing turn people away from government because they have succeeded. There's plenty of public opinion polls. People really don't like government. Now, they like the stuff. But when you talk about it as government, they say, And so we have to come to grips with the sort of the truth of that. And, and it's crazy to generalize, a population as diverse as politically and all as the United States, but it's anti-government attitudes are deeply embedded in the left, the right, and the left in America. It's, this is the work I do. I've been doing it for 25 years, and we have to come to terms with it. And that means to me a couple things. And I used to think in 19 for this group, you want to interrupt me or you want to just wait till I'm done, Don? Because you're emeritus. Okay, I'll keep going. In 1994, some of you may know this if you saw me speak, I was part of a small group of people that put a single payer initiative on the California ballot. We collected 1 million signatures in 94, half with volunteers, and we got killed. We got 27% of the vote, and it was not because we were outspent. This was 1994. Gingrich took over America. It was after Hillary care. There was a a moment of rejection of government, really profound. And Gingrich takes over the House of Representatives and goes after Medicare, right? Immediately, right? And so this was the attack on government at a pinnacle. So this is and I thought after that, I took some time off and sort of before this, like what happened in America, right? People turned away from public things and government solutions and all that. And so I'm oversimplifying at all costs in all ways, but And I thought that our principal task as progressives was to rebuild trust in government. What I've come to more recently is I don't think that's the central task. I think the central task is to rebuild commitment to the idea of public, that there are things that if we want to do them, we can only do them together. We have to do them together. And then governments, as complex as they are, 20 million people work for government in the United States, in many, in gazillion jurisdictions. Then we take the instrument, then we have to, our job is to reform the institution always to make it better and better. The right talks about the free market. They lead with the idea, and then the corporations are their instrument. So I think that's super important. Then the last thing I'll say about that is what I mean when I say that progressives have helped the right wing. I've been doing this work a long time, as many of you have as well. We're attacking the government all the time, the progressives, in lots of our campaigns. And because we want to get things done, and we say, okay, so you haven't gotten that done, so let's go do it, or you have failed, or there's an oil spill in the Gulf, and we blame that part of the Mineral and Mining Agency that let it happen, even though BP is the one that actually, let the oil into the water. We're constantly holding the government accountable, and in the end, kind of attacking it. And showing its failures, whether it be in public schools, whether it be in everything. So you think about it, there's lots of examples of this. And I think, because I'm staying focused on this because I think about it a lot, and I think it's a real problem on our side of things. The right wing's attacking government. The left wing is kind of too, even though everything we want relies on the role of government. And people don't like them. And then I say the same thing to public sector union members, of which, workers, in public sector unions, of which there are lots. And I say, if we're not advocates for public things, if we're not lifting up the examples of success and progress, what do we expect the American people to think? So, and public things are all around us. Positive examples of public things. The paint on every one of your walls used to have lead in it. It doesn't. Public action. Public health action, right? So I just, it's a little bit of a soapbox thing for me, is we've got to get better. I mean, I'll say two things. We can't say, oh, no, government's great. We have to be the reformers, say it has done great things. It does positive things. It needs to be better. Where it's incomplete, we need to make it complete, right? So I think it's really important we do that. We have to learn how to critique it without undermining the idea. So that doesn't, so the last thing I'll say, because I made a note about private industry, because when I think it was, I don't remember, Pat Paul, I think, people aren't so happy with private industry now either. There's an opening. They don't like the banks, they don't like the oil companies, they don't like the pharmaceuticals. So the question is can we take our dislike, they think there's something wrong with capitalism, with those big companies that are making too much money. Can we take that discontent and drive it to a new common sense, as opposed to the common sense that businesses are always efficient? That sticks. That becomes like the default for most people. That's a lot of stuff. I didn't get to fascism yet, but let's come back to that. Don, I wanted to stop to let people talk.
Don, you're muted.
You're muted, Don McCann.
Okay, you hear me now? Yeah.
Yep.
We've been very frustrated about the very things you're talking about, the rhetoric, the communication, for a couple of decades now, this has been going on, and a few of us old timers who are on our way out, I was in coma with the morticians waiting for me, and I woke back up, and another good friend who's very prominent just had his aortic valve replaced, and we know if we don't do something, we're not going to see the changes. And there are 5 of us who are going to have a Zoom meeting Thursday morning and I threw out a topic that we want to discuss that's in this email. And I just want to read 2 short paragraphs. The name of the email is Declaration of War, and it has to do with all of this rhetoric that's going around. And the 2 paragraphs are, I think that it's time for a declaration of war. I do not mean guns, bullets, and bombs. I'm a pacifist. I mean a political war, a national health policy war. The war has already been taking place for a long time on the opponent's side. We have had the right policy, comprehensive, affordable, high-quality health care for all, but we have had the wrong politics. Millions of people dying, ubiquitous financial hardship, the great financial costs of the misdirection of healthcare spending, and the spoils of this political healthcare war filling the coffers of the billionaires. Their war is killing people and costing billions. Our war will be saving billions and, above all, saving lives. No more bullcrap about the government can't do anything right. We can't accept this anymore. When you look at the policies that single payer would bring us, universal, equitable, affordability based on progressive taxation, efficient public administration, accessibility for all, just to mention a few, then we know only single payer will do. We must fight and win outright the political war in order to achieve it. No more namby-pamby political compromises. This is not a war against individuals, but instead it is a war against poisonous policy. Anyway, that's a topic we're going to discuss Thursday morning and see if maybe we can start a some kind of a national movement. Something I don't want to say the names of the other people. They're very prominent, and I, obviously shouldn't have said this much, but damn it, we got to do something. And you've got me fired up, Donald, and we got to do it. Doggone it.
Yeah.
Whether we call it a war or whatever, the rhetoric that we use, whatever it is, we've got to really change the tenor. We got to get the process. We've talked about it forever. I've been talking about about 30 years or something, and gotten nowhere. Things are worse.
Thank you, Don. Thank you. So I'm wondering, we have Lynn and Rich have something to share. I'm wondering whether at some point we want to go into breakout rooms, or whether it was like, is 32 enough, too many people, or do we want to continue staying in the large group? There have been a couple of good questions in the chat. I see we could throw people in the rooms with Patty Harvey's questions there. Why don't we take Lynn and Rich, and then we'll decide whether we want to go into breakout rooms.
Sometimes this whole issue, fascism, it just seems overwhelming. So my suggestion is to do things at the city council and county levels, getting involved with issues. Because if you start small and get really interested in activism, then I think people will feel you get more people to do things together. I like the idea of universal vote that many countries have, and that way people are forced to get involved with their government and understand that the power is with them against these huge, wealthy fortresses that are hard to fight. So That's what I do. I work at the city council, county and state levels, and then I feel like I have some control of what's happening where I live.
Thank you, Lynn.
And there are things that you can do at that level that expand the number of people with healthcare, that deal with the big issues. There are concrete and real things you could do at that level of government. I'm sorry, maybe, go ahead.
That might be interesting to hear in just a minute. Let's hear Rich, and then maybe Mike had a comment about how he might manage the next section. Rich?
David, I'd like to go back to your comments about the 40 years of very successful efforts by conservatives to deem government to be bad, government to be the problem. To counter that, what I read on that subject is to counter it in the world of healthcare and in, as is mentioned before, in sort of equity across the board. But for the moment, for healthcare language, that we need to come up with 3 or 4 phrases, or maybe just 2 or 3, that counter that argument, but also ring true in terms of conservative values. Let me try one. I'm not sure everyone would agree this resonates with conservative values. Publicly funded, privately delivered healthcare is a phrase a lot of people tonight will recognize. That's the phrase, and we really need to stop talking about a government health program. Again, for the reasons you've mentioned. Dr. Ed Weisbart with PNHP says he hates the phrase healthcare is a human right. And that one's been around long enough. Maybe there's some middle of the road folks that are starting to accept that. But he says for conservatives, when they hear that, it means, oh, I know what that means. You want me to pay for those people. So how do we come up with phrases that are meaningful to the point? There are a small handful of them, and capture the people in the middle that may not be ready to embrace Medicare for all.
I have things to say. Do you want Mike? Do you
Yes,
want to go first, or should I say something?
Please go ahead.
So I have random things to say in response. The first is we need a drumbeat. The right wing succeeded because they had a drumbeat over and over. They interpreted the world as it happened with their core ideas. Government's messed up, government's wasteful. They say that over and over again, and they point to examples that seem like, okay, that makes sense. The business is better, So we need that. We need a drumbeat, and it's not just. So I'm a little bit disagreeing with you. It's not just a phrase. So I mean, we need all. In the end, we need it all, right? It's not one. It is not one thing. I did put a link in the chat of a booklet that I wrote on the attack on government. It's much shorter than my actual book. But the second thing I want to say is that, again, there's different levels where we have to operate. There's a value level. Their values are people are individual responsible. They should pay for the health care. If they don't pay for it, they don't value it. If they don't pay for it, they'll use too much of it. And if they're sick, it's their own fault. That's their values. And there's little bits of truth in all of that, okay, perhaps. But our values, based on what I believe to be objectively true, is that we are interdependent. We actually, like I said at the very beginning, to me, COVID, underscored the idea that the health of all of us depends on the health of each of us, right? So we have to, and then so our interdependence is not just a value; it's a fact. If kids aren't educated, it affects us all, and that's got to be, in my view, that would be okay. How do we do a drumbeat on that to show that, to counter the personal responsibility idea, because that one's never going away. We just have to supplant it. So I'll just mention those two things as response. But it's so because people we have to, like I said earlier, people really don't like government. So the question is, and we can't be the defenders of government they don't like. We can be the advocates for government that they don't know they like. We should be doing that, but that should be a drumbeat also. But then we have to say something different about, that we're all in this together. And that we have to we're all in this together and embody that in policy and tax law and all that sort of stuff. So let me stop there.
Thank you, Donald. Rich, do you have more to say, or I see your hand is up, and then Mike has had his hand up for a little bit, and then Chuck.
At the risk of alienating some more folks here, because I really loved Ed Weisbart's study of how conservatives, he listened to Rush Limbaugh for 15 minutes a day for 6 months to understand how conservatives use words and phrases. And then he offered some support back. He's got this great presentation on the PNHP website. But I'm looking at some of the chats where people are irritated with a little bit of my phraseology, including one that healthcare is a human right. From a purely strategic standpoint, if we're here to get Medicare for all across the finish line, we as liberals or progressives need to stop falling on our swords for ideological phrases we love. The goal is to resonate with the 20 to 30% of the folks in the middle. We don't need to keep preaching to the true believers. And that's why we need different phrases.
And on the healthcare as a human right, it's like, there's another level here. There's an idea. We can decide that in America, this is a democratic decision that healthcare should be a human civil right in this country, that it's a public good, as I defined earlier. That's a decision we can make. Now we have to build the argument that counters the other stuff that people are saying about, but it's those lazy people and blah, 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 they deserve it. But that's an idea that we ought to be, we believe it. We have to figure out how to communicate, not just communicate it, we have to make it true.
Why not just say everyone needs healthcare?
Well, I think everyone agrees with that, but then.
Yes, that's why I say use it. Everyone needs healthcare. It's just terribly basic.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you.
Mike?
I'd like to follow up on Don's warrior mood, that we can be pretty effective opportunistic warriors. Just yesterday, a couple of days, there's been articles in our papers about city governments in financial crunches. And that's just a golden opportunity. If we know enough about the city finances to see how much they're sending away to insurance companies, we can say, look, you can solve your budget crunch by getting rid of the privatized healthcare system you're paying way too much for and getting too little for. So that's one thing. The other is the rhetoric, following up on Rich's comments. As much as I like Warren George and his Quaker background, he cannot stand the idea of a blame game or accusing anybody of anything. But if we are to reach young people, they cannot stand the idea of CEOs making $24 million. And in that audience, I think we have to carefully use that kind of blame game, and apologize to Warren later.
Amen, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
Amen.
Chuck, and then I actually have my hand up. Chuck?
Yeah, thanks, Betty. Just to, I think the point I made earlier is accentuated, when I talked about fascism, and I do so very straightforward. It's very simple, but everybody's using conservative to describe the extreme right, the fascist right. And I have to ask why. Why are we using their term? Why do people use this, fall into the trap of saying pro-life when it's pro-life from conception to birth, right? I mean, that's basically what we're talking pro-life. They're not pro-life. They're not pro-life after the child is born, but yet we allow that to go on. Democracy and Change is another good book. Donald, you probably know this one, Nancy McLean. I mean, that's the blueprint that came out of the post Brown decision. 1954, 55. That's a very good catapults, because the James Buchanan ran that idea around until he found the Koch brothers, and now we have ALEC. And another question I have is, why do we not have something comparable on the left, an ALEC of the left? You know, where we have a disciplined messaging center where we can all, I think people resonate with this, is that so that we're all speaking using the same terminology and we resonate with one another rather than fighting over how we talk about things. If we want to use single payer and health care as a human right in this circle right here, fine. But when we go outside of the circle and talk to the larger public, we have to do so in a way that they hear. They're not going to hear healthcare as a human right. And having said that, this is the 75th anniversary of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, which was primarily authored by Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt, 75 years ago, 1948. Maybe we need to take every month and celebrate one of those basic human rights and talk about it in a way, as you said, as a public good. Just a few ideas just to share here. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. So my comment was coming back to the healthcare as a human right. And I think it's problematic to think that, well, we have the right answer, what we're saying is right. And so that's just the end of the discussion, because then you don't have a discussion. Like you're not actually persuading the other person if you end the discussion. So I'd like to use an example of when I was wrestling with the language, because I knew it wasn't really working for a certain proportion of our population in Vermont. It worked great with lots of them, but it didn't work for a large chunk, a significant chunk that was necessary to win over. And the way I looked at it is that healthcare, human rights are things that every single person should have. And if you define it like water or food, maybe today you can say that everybody needs the internet, because otherwise it's hard economically to get a new job and that sort of thing, to find the apartment, whatever. But how do you define like healthcare? Like how much healthcare? What the healthcare that we think of as a human right didn't even exist 100 years ago, and we don't know what healthcare there will be 50 years from now. So how do you set that line and say where the human right is? So I can appreciate that some people may just like say it's not a human right because we didn't used to have healthcare, so how could it be? So if we can phrase it more in the public good, like I just don't know why some people are so resistant to using the frame of public good. And then the other thing is, I know some people hate this, but it's a fiscally responsible thing to do when you look at where the money's flowing. And why are we so adamantly opposed to using honest phrasing with people with whom that will resonate?
Okay.
So that was actually a question. Why are we opposed to using that
Well,
language?
I wrote that down, but let's let the others, and then if it's a question to me, let's let Diane and Hank.
The question to anybody who wants
Okay,
to
good.
respond.
Okay.
Diane?
Hi, we just passed healthcare as a human right thing on the ballot in the last year here in Oregon. And it's hugely disappointing because it's a human right for some people, but not for those of us in the middle class who can't get what we need and can't afford to just go and pay for it. But what I really raised my hand to talk about was on the messaging issue. I used to ride the bus a lot and would talk to people about single payer without saying it was single payer. And I'd say, what would you think if we could have a system where we all had the same access to health care? We could all get what we need, but we each paid what we could afford. And maybe that was the most successful of any approach that I took. We get what we need, but we pay what we can afford. So maybe we should look at that.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane. Hank?
So there's a couple of stories, can't remember, but let's say 80 years ago, the 6 billionaires for big tobacco flew down to South Carolina and had a meeting and came up with their strategy for big tobacco. I think big oil did that 50 years ago when their scientists told them there was such a thing as climate change coming down the road. And big opioid did that 25 years ago when they flew their billionaires down somewhere to an island in South Carolina and said, how are we going to do this? So my question is our group, of course, is dispirited, or not dispirited, well, that too, disparate and underfunded, shall we say. So to Don Cohen, who's going to be our billionaire who's going to fly our 6 people down to an island in South Carolina and craft the message for the next decade? And if that's not possible with a situation that we exist, what is your grassroots recommendation as an old organizer?
All right, that's a really good question that we may not have time for me to answer. So first off,
We want to hear it though.
okay. I mean, our billionaire, George Soros is our billionaire. Like, there's other rich folks and foundations and all that. So that's not the answer. I get money from the Ford Foundation. I think I don't get money from Soros now, the Open Society Foundation. I think I have in the past. So I think the issue is, you said, you didn't say disaggregated, you said disparate, right?
Disparate.
Right. I'll often use the word disaggregated, but in the same meaning of the American progressive infrastructure. There's organization, I travel a fair amount. There's organizations that are doing good work all over the country, funded by local foundations, national foundations, unions, their own donors. We have what I call the added up problem. There's folks who work on housing, there's folks who work on healthcare, there's folks who work on the environment, there's folks who work on school to prison pipeline. I mean, you literally could make the list of issues that people are legitimately doing good work on, and that it would go on for pages. So I think what we have is an organizational problem, not a funding problem. Now, we definitely need the money. So the funding is real, but we don't have we don't have a central committee of a party that says, here's our line. I'm not saying Communist Party, I'm just saying any kind of party, right? To say, here's what we're going to do, and we're all going to do it together. We don't have that in this country. It doesn't exist. So what I've tried to think about and talk about and do and work in my, figure out in what I do during the day is, how do we align what exists so that it adds up to something different? Now, it has to add up in a few ways. One, we have to be able to punch at the same time on the big ones, whether it was healthcare, whether it's, it's plenty, or the financial, whatever, the climate bill or the Build Back Better, or we have to, all that stuff going on around the country, all the action online and offline needs to be able to punch at the same time. But we also have to add up to what I referred to earlier as kind of the new common sense. No, it's, corporations can't do it. If you want everyone to have healthcare, to Rich's point, corporations can play a role, but they can't do it. It's not possible. So we need a new common sense that has to add up. This is the world I swim in, and I'm frustrated every day by it. It's all the disaggregation. It's a problem. So I think that's, it's not just because I go to those, I don't go to South Carolina, but I go to meetings all the time where it's like, we're smart, let's figure out the message, and then there's another one that did the same thing again, and then there's another one. And then the last thing I'll say, I'm being a little flip. I don't think it's message. I think it's people, it's ideas first, right? That they're, and then it's how do we talk about it? And more importantly, how we talk about it, what's our strategy to get from here to there? People believe government waste. I'm going to say something pretty unpopular right now in this group. I think single payer is politically horrible for progressives when you get into a real fight, because I did it, right? It was, many years ago, but I think the conditions are the same, because when you get into a real fight, whether it's on the ballot or in Congress, it's two things. It's lose your doctor, big government healthcare, higher taxes, lose your doctor. That's where the debate goes. And I think we have to acknowledge that's really where the debate's going to be. So how do we change the terms of the debate? And that's the easiest thing to say. It's unbelievably hard to do. So I think alignment that we add up, and strategy. How do we get from here to there with a clear understanding of really where we are today? That's a very short answer to long memos that I've written to myself. Betty, the other, I was gonna say two other things. So, and if anyone's hanging up on me because I said that, why don't we say the right things to Betty, your point of fiscal? I am a fiscal conservative. I teach fiscal responsibility to my children. They still ask me for too much money. And they're all adults. I mean, there's facts. I think that, the world, there's a part of the world that's about math. You have to, if you want things, you have to pay for them. There's not unlimited money. We all, and then in fact, we all have to pay. Now, those that can pay more, they need to pay more because we're interdependent, we all benefit from it. So I think it's really important to get to that places. We can't, people will think, oh, government's going to get healthcare, they're going to waste all this money, and it's going to go up. So we have to deal with. So I think you're absolutely right, Betty. We've got to talk about. We absolutely need to be fiscally responsible. You are in your family. So anyway, and then to Chuck about why do we call them conservatives and not fascists? And I'll stop because I think there's more than one type. Our opponents are more diverse than just the fascists. We can let's leave it at that, and let the other come back, and maybe if there's time, I'll say more. Betty had her hand up, and then Dwight. And so I'm taking over your job, Betty. Betty Kislov has her hand up, not Betty Keller.
Hello, it's nice to see another Betty too. A lot of different points that are coming to the fore here, but one thing that was referred to before that I just want to drop in here is, the past 40 years, what has happened over the past 40 years in getting us to this point. I don't know if this was mentioned before I came into the group here, but I refer everybody to the Powell memo. It's a Lewis Powell memo, which is a really good. He was, I'll call him the father of the plan for the right to get to where they are now. And another thing, Donald, yes, you just mentioned a word, and I think you mentioned it before, that is one of my pet words, which is responsibility. And in referring to this country is really, so many people in this country are constantly declaring, I have this right, I have that right, I have the right to do what I want. No, and there is never, it stops there. There is never any discussion that a right is accompanied by responsibility. And that is not spoken about in this country. I think there's a UN Declaration of Human Rights and Responsibilities, but that doesn't seem to have made it out of the UN into the rest of this country. So it's interesting, everybody talking about like gun rights. I have the right to own guns, but they never talk about the responsibility that comes with that. Now, saying healthcare is a human right. Okay, I agree. It is. It's a human right. It's an Earth community right. It's a planetary right, and I think, as Einstein, one of many incredible things that Einstein says, you can't solve a problem on the level it was created, on the level of the thinking that was that created it, and the idea of to get for everyone to have health care, it's the responsibility of everyone to come up with a system that provides that. And it is our responsibility as as a country, as a human, as a planetary being, to come up with that. Now, what was the phrase they've just brought up before? I'll bring this up because it may help me come back to that. You know, Pat Schroeder, Representative Pat Schroeder. Unfortunately, I just heard she died today. She, I remember going to a conference in the early 90s where she was the main speaker, and she was talking about the way the US looks at defense and our defense budget. And defense gets everything at once, and lately more than it wants, more than it requests. And then the human need programs are, you know, parsed here and there, getting dribbles of what's left. And she was talking about how in the modern Western European countries, how they deal with the human needs, and then what is left goes for defense.
And Betty, let me say, just because I'm looking at the clock, and I want to emphasize something you said, if you don't mind.
Yeah, okay.
So I could not agree with you more about the issue of responsibility. Rights come with responsibility. In the healthcare, we are all responsible to pay for it. We're responsible to try to be healthy. I mean, right? To not do harm to somebody else. So I think it's what the right wants us to be is consumers of public service, of what we think should be public goods. But we're not consumers, we're citizens with rights and with responsibilities. And I think it is really important because, you know, that's what it means to be a citizen. So I just want to respond to that, because then White had his hand up also. So I wanted to make sure, and I think we're running out of time. That's why I'm Betty. Yeah, go ahead, Betty.
Can I just say too, I totally agree we become consumers. And I think it's because of the last 40 years and has brought us to that. But one thing which I think I've heard mainly in discussions on the Thom Hartmann show, the other gentleman who brought up Thom Hartmann, who I think has a lot to contribute to things. But anyway, I've heard people call in and say that what it seems like a lot of the, I'll call it far right or whatever, is concerned with, maybe not even consciously, but that if someone else gets something, that means I will lose something. And I think that is something that is really underlying a lot of the reactions to healthcare as a human right. And, you know, why should I pay for someone else's, healthcare?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Betty, you're on mute. Betty Keller, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was just asking Dwight to go. Thank you, Betty.
Yeah, I chatted what has been my biggest frustration in trying to move us towards improved Medicare for all over the last 16 years of my life. But that being said, we can talk about messaging all we want, but who has the microphone, and how do we get the microphone to convince that those people in the middle that their minds can be changed with facts and the idea that we can have a healthcare system that covers everybody and is more affordable than the present system that is going to bankrupt us. But that's not just a microphone for the major media. My son, who has going off the deep end, is reading all these people on social media. You know, he has this podcast and that podcast. And I guess we only have to reach the middle of our population, those that have open minds, to change their minds to get enough support for improved Medicare for all. But the question is, how do we get that microphone? I
mean, it's not just the microphone, it's also the power to make it happen. Right, so if we can't, I mean, if we had a very different Congress and a very different Senate, very different, then we'd have a shot. We had a close shot on the public option. When was that? When Obama was, president?
Yeah.
But couldn't get the votes, right? So I think it's really important. They focused on getting the power to implement, whoever the they is, it's a different set of days, to implement, to stack the Supreme Court, to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we got to do both.
So I'm wondering if I can come back to, you were earlier saying that you had to align your priorities and ideals so that you had an endpoint that you could all agree on, and then develop the strategy of how it would get there, and then figure out the messaging that would support you getting there. Am I
That's
reiterating
basically
that?
right. Yeah, I think
Okay.
what I really, your first point of getting that we all agree on, it's like, who's the all, right? So that's our structural problem. There's no central place that we all get to vote, right? But what I think a lot about is, how do we get to the point where all the stuff that we're all doing adds up to new set of beliefs that become like part of the DNA of America. And then, of course, that we get the power to implement those ideas. The market's the wrong tool for healthcare. That level. This is just how I think about it. Other people think about it differently. So yes, but I think if we're not thinking about what it's going to take to get, when you think about what's it going to take to get single payer passed, or to get people to, believe something different, it starts you off and trying to have a sober analysis of where things are today. Who's got the power? Where are the American people? What do they believe? And there's no American people. There are segments of the American people. So you have to think, it forces you to think strategically, like, what's it going to take? Because it's going to be more than just coming up with a phrase, even though we need to do that. It's going to be a set of things. I don't know if did I respond to you correctly?
I guess, but I'm wondering, like, some concrete things to do to get there. Like, we are not a group that gets a place to vote somewhere and choose our board of directors to choose our mission. But how do you, like big oil, they can figure out who are the owners of their competitors, and they all get together in kibbutz, right? Or the big pharma gets together with the competitors and they kibbutz.
Right.
What do we do?
So it's funny when you said, whoever was saying that, it's like, and big venture capital, whoever that is, was meeting all weekend, literally 3 days ago or 2 days ago, because of, this isn't going to be satisfying. So one of the points on getting you to universal healthcare, let's take single payer out of this, we have to show that corporations, insurance companies, the healthcare, the healthcare industry. So it's health insurance companies, it's pharma, it's kind of the key ones that are taking the money out of the system that we should be using for care. We have to figure out how we get a drumbeat on, look at how much money they're making and taking out, right? They're a problem. And it's not they're a problem because they're greedy, they're a problem because they're taking money out of healthcare, right? So could I'm not sure if this is right or not, but this is where you take a strategy and you get it into tactics. Somebody said it earlier, whoever we're talking about working at the city council level, I think maybe that was Lynn. All right, how much money is the city paying, if it's the city we're talking about, paying extra for high CEO salaries, and that's being extracted, that's not being used on healthcare because of the money that they're spending. What if we all did that for 10 years? Now, it's a silly thing to say, but so are there tactics we can come up with in the PNHP world and in the universal healthcare world that would add up to, yeah, we got to do something about those guys? Now, the flip side of that is, and then are there tactics that would add up to, yeah, well, I guess the government really needs to do this because it seems like they actually can do it. But it's not, it's not going to be one report or not one op-ed and all that. It's going to be a drumbeat. So how do we get not just the message, but the message, an op-ed that shows how greedy they are, how much money they're taking, or a report or a protest in front of an insurance company, but that adds up to those two streams. And I just, I made that up on the top, off the top of my head, but I've been, I've cared about this for a long time. They're in the way. We got to get them out of the way. We got to convince people we can get out of the way, and we got to convince people that we can do it better. Because everyone sort of believes we should have it.
Yes.
But they also believe that, I don't want to take care of somebody who's, doesn't take care of themselves. That's not fair. So we got to operate on those kind of beliefs and figure out how we hammer in different ways, but that add up to those things. Anyway, Lynn, you had your hand. I was making this up. But
one of the projects that I'm embarking on is finding out how many uninsured are in each legislator's district and letting them know that they are not supporting health care for their constituents, and that is a travesty.
Right.
And I think I can go to UCLA, usually keeps those statistics.
Yeah, the health center, the health policy center there. Yeah, I think you're right.
Right.
Yeah, and that's right. And then again, we have to then show that because there is sort of it's a moral question, right? That there are people who can't get the health care they need because they can't afford it or they don't have it. That's just wrong. And, people are of multiple minds. They can think that, and they can also think, but, they can also hate the government. So how do we get people, their mind thinking about, that's just wrong, that it should matter. It's hard for me when you say it this way. I would say to somebody who doesn't believe this, you think that someone who doesn't have the money should die sooner or be sicker. That's what you think. Let's ask them. Let's make them say it out loud.
Now, we asked Donald here for just an hour and a half, and he's gone way over with his generosity. Betty, do you want to sum up?
Gosh, I don't know that I can sum up. So I really appreciate your time, Donald. It's been a great conversation. It's pretty impressive. We started off with 21 about 10 after, and then we had 32 at quarter of, I think it was. And we still have 28, even though it's an hour and 40 minutes. So obviously a good conversation. I don't know what we want to do for follow-up. I mean, I would love to have more conversation with AJ about, okay, let's pick a day. How would you do that? To pick a day that you just say, we're not going to buy insurance after this day or something. Like, how do we, they say that in France and in the UK, people are out on the streets and that's how they make change happen. In America, we're not used to getting out on the streets. Well, how do we get people out on the streets? I'll tell you, it shouldn't be January 1 though, because it's wicked cold up here. Chuck?
I put because we cover all sorts of issues of privatization, which you clearly care about. We send out one thing a week, so it's not a lot, and it's just a blog. It's not ready. I put how to sign up for our mailing list because we do look at schools and healthcare and all stuff. So.
Thank you. Thank you. And Chuck, you have your hand up.
Yeah, maybe the way to go forward, since Donald, you keep coming back to the term strategy. I have a 16-point strategy document that I've shared with most people in our organization and other organizations. I'd love to get together with you and just chat about it, because it covers, I believe, all of the pieces that we need to constitute a winning strategy, beginning with a visioning exercise. What kind of a society do we want? And to hold that in our minds, the justice for all society, a utopian society, if you will, and then do a kind of a reverse engineer process of saying, how did we get there in terms of resources, in terms of communications, in terms of linking ourselves, in terms of identifying? I know I keep coming back to fascism, and I'm going to get you to use that word eventually, I promise. But no, and honestly, that's the billionaire class, and they're the ones who are controlling us from the top. I really, truly do believe that after having studied this. But all those different things, we have to use our terminology. We need to create timelines. We need to actually understand the difference between a tactical mindset, which I believe is where the vast majority of people are, and a strategic mindset, which is to say that you have to keep asking yourself, is what I'm doing right now, spending 8 hours a day on email, is that really strategic? I mean, I think it's a fair question to ask. And I know a lot of people who are in that space, and it's like, you're stuck. You got to get out of there. Go take a walk, and let's have a conversation about what real strategy looks like. So I'd love to connect with you.
Yeah, sure. No, they've got me emoji. And let me just say, although this is dangerous because you'll want to respond, but on fascism, I use the term. I just think this is not a fascist country right now. I do think it is possible for this country to become fascist, like literally fascist.
Right.
And the reason I say it, of course, the billionaires and it's a class. I don't disagree with you, but I think politically, if you want to move a thing, there are different segments of that we need to understand. So lumping them all together, it deserves us. In terms of thinking, so that's why I said it's dangerous, because we're running out of time. But there's the neoliberals, then there's the fascists, then there's the religious folks, and there's that. So I just think it's better to articulate them. Let's get it back to Betty or else we're gonna go at it.
So Bill, I'm wondering if you might want to share what you have to say in the chat there. What I wanted to just find out from people quickly is it's almost quarter of. We've been here for an hour and 45 minutes, and we don't actually have someone nailed down for next month on our second Tuesday. And I'm wondering if I could see a show of hands of who would like us to do something interactive with breakout rooms and people leading in the different rooms and try to hash through some of this some more. Is that something people would be interested in? I see one head shaking no, and I don't, I do see some hands up. So so I have my hand up. Bill, is your hand up still from before? Okay, so I'm looking to see whose hands are up, either physically or with an icon, and I'm going to be slow counting. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Betty, could
5,
I
6,
that you invite Richard Wolf to speak, or
7,
Zuzka?
8. So I only see 8 hands right now out of our 27. Let me look at the second screen. Oh, okay. Of course, it's hard for me to figure out when you look at the second screen how many are repeats. Okay, so we have like 8 or 10 or something. And Bill, what were you saying about a guest?
Inviting, can you hear me?
I can.
So inviting Richard Wolf, who is the top economist in the country that really has a handle on this thing. He's really profound and an incredible speaker. And I can give you a phone number, or Bezruchka, who just wrote this book called Inequality. I mean, I think.
Are these people who are going to ask for big bucks for speaking engagements?
No. These people.
Oh, wait a second. I could have got paid
$10,000 a pop.
Wait, I could have got paid.
Some socialist he is.
You're gonna get my bill.
Well, I know some people who write books do charge a large quantity. Like the person who wrote, I can't remember the name of the book now. I reached out to, and it's like, oh my gosh, $100,000. What?
Richard speaks to over 300,000 people on his podcast every month. Richard Wolf in New York City. He's incredible. He wrote the book Understanding Socialism, Understanding Marxism. He's a genius. He's incredible, and he talks with no rhetoric, with no tricky words. It's
okay.
Just
so we can.
He
I
does charge thousands of dollars to come and to give talks. So I wouldn't be too sure. He's on his own watch when he does his program, Economic Update and other things. So he's not such a socialist as he makes himself out.
We'll put it in the hopper to think some more about how we follow up next month. And I'd actually be interested in hearing from Donald Cohen, also his thoughts about how we might, whether he has some ideas for follow-up we can discuss after this. Thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate your time and your passion and all of your work. Thank you so much.
And donate to one-payer states so we can do more of these.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Really,
And if you want to hang on for a couple of minutes to talk, oh, I'm sorry, Donald, what'd you say?
I'd say this was really fun. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed doing this.
Great, thank you.
Your time,
If
Don.
if
Thank you.
anybody wants to hang on for a couple minutes to have a conversation about future follow-up, you can hang on for just a minute, but I'll excuse you all from the classroom and whoever's hanging out afterward.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Maybe,
All right.
maybe stop the recording, Mike.